bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the most read group of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more, all featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL, from the great one to the next one, from the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Hockey Raiders Oilers Overtime. My name is Jim Parsons. I'm here with hockeyraiders.com. We're one shy today, but that's okay because we got lots to talk about, and we got two excellent panelists that cover the Oilers with us. Brian Swane is here. Brian, how are you?
Good, Jim. How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm doing good. I'm interested to talk about what we're going to talk about tonight because I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit polarizing. It certainly is among fans, and Julian's going to weigh in. I'm sure Julian Mongillo is with us. Julian, how are you?
Good, guys. How's it going? It seems like we can never get a break as news keeps just rolling in these days.
Well, I don't necessarily want a break. I just said last week that I was like, man, if we don't have any news to talk about,
it's never a dull moment. Just doesn't go stale.
Yeah, we didn't know if anything was going to happen, right? We were on the verge of maybe talking about a Darnell Nurse deal, but we didn't know if it was going to happen right away because technically he didn't have to sign anything right now. He's got another year left on his contract, right? So then all of a sudden, right after we said, well, maybe we will go, he signs a deal for another 8 years. So we got lots to talk about. So we'll do that. For everybody who's watching this, don't forget, hit the like button on Facebook, wherever you're watching this, on YouTube, hit the notification button. Let us know if you like the show, comment on it. We'll answer the comments as much as we possibly can. And feel free if you want to ask questions, and we're looking for content to cover next week. We'll probably get to that. So Brian, let's start with Darnell Nurse. The big news of the week for the Oilers is that he has signed an 8-year extension worth $74 million. It's going to start at the end of next season. So he's still got 5.6, I think, and change on this current deal. He's got one more year at that one. And then it kicks in 9.25 after that per season, which has really stirred up a lot of the Oilers fan base. Some people like it because they're really fans of Darnell Nurse and they think you got to keep a guy like that in tow and leadership core, keep them together. Others are like, what kind of money is that for a guy who had one really good year? Where do you sit on this, Brian?
I think it's a good signing. I'm glad. I mean, okay, it's astronomical money. Let's get that out of the way first. It kind of makes my head explode when I hear people complaining about the money for someone who grew up in a time when the Oilers could not afford to keep anybody. Like, I watched 20 years or 15 years of this team just watch superstar after star after star walk out the door because they couldn't afford it. And now we're spending to keep these guys, and it's like nobody's happy. So is it an overpay? Probably. I think, I mean, I love Nurse's game. I think what he showed last year is the guy he's going to be for years and years to come. He's still really young. We've seen with many of the great defensemen that they're able to maintain this level of play well into the 30s, which is where, of course, he's going to be at the conclusion of this 9-year deal. But it's like, as we've talked about some of the other signings they've made, that Holland has made in the last few weeks, whether it be Nugent Hopkins or the Hyman deal. I mean, this is all about getting these guys here and having them here for the next 4 or 5 years. And then whatever salary issues come up, contract issues come up over the time after that, they'll deal with that then. But, and who knows? You've brought up the good point the last couple of weeks that what will the salary cap look like down the line? What's it going to be in 9 years? Like, how much, what percentage of the salary cap is 9.25 going to be then? I mean, what would it have been? What was the salary cap 9 years ago versus today? Right. So It's constantly going up. It's going up, and it certainly won't be making as big a dent then as it is now. So, I mean, yeah, it's an overpay if you just look at it on the market, but that's also at the same time, that's what you have to do to keep guys like this. And I'm glad that he'll be here for some time now.
Okay, before I move on to Julian and ask for his opinion on this, and just a real quick answer, Brian, what is the overpay? Is it the fact that all these defensemen are getting 9 and change, or is it the fact that Darnell Nurse got 9 and change? What is it that you have the most issue? All of them?
All of them, yeah.
I know it's a wake-up call for a lot of people that this is where these defensemen are at this point.
The bar's been set. This is where the bar is now, yeah.
Julian, what's your take on this deal? Are you looking at this as something that could play itself out and be a value for Edmonton at some point, or is Darnell Nurse going to have a hard time living up to this contract? It's a lot of money, as Brian just pointed out, but it's the market. It is what it is. And I guess some people have an issue that maybe Darnell Nurse is not necessarily a bona fide number one. He's getting this money and he hasn't necessarily proven that he's the guy yet. He had a fantastic season last year, but we don't know if he's going to be able to reproduce that. Where do you sit on this?
I sit both sides kind of, but at the end of the day, I just think that if you're giving a player $9 million, I just think that he needs to be your stud on the power play, your horse in the back, which Darnell Nurse is, but Barry, we know, is going to have all the power play time on that unit. So if you're going to pay a defenseman to what Nurse got, it's got to be, you're going to play almost 30 minutes a game, or somewhere between 25 to 30 minutes a game, including power play. So but I love the player. I love that they kept him in and around, and I know they had to buy some years of free agency, I think, off of it. So that's probably why it's a little bit higher.
All 8 years are unrestricted,
right? So that's going to factor into, and it's just going back to what we talked about before of keeping the core together. So, this is Holland's idea of the win now time, and we've seen that by the moves he's made already, and this is their window. So locking him in now, it just makes it just confirms basically that they're in this to win something, at least in the next 2 or 3 years. And like Brian had alluded to, it's just all these defensemen are getting paid that money now. But imagine what Quinn Hughes is going to get, all these guys are going to get paid. Makar set the bar. Seth Jones contract kind of threw everything out of whack, I think, because you got Victor Hedman making 7.6 or something like that. And now you got guys like Seth Jones setting the bar at 9.5 or whatever he got. So I think this puts Nurse into the top 5 paid defenseman, highest paid defenseman in the league next season. And I think it's Carlson at the top at 11.5, Doughty at 11 mil. And then I think I got it here. You got Zach Werenski, which was another one of those that kind of set the bar. And he's at 9.5, right? And then Seth Jones and Nurse. So those two, that Werenski one and that Jones one, kind of set the bar for all these guys coming in now. And you look at the Leafs, they're going to have Morgan Riley coming up. That's going to be a big one for if that's what these guys are getting now. He's easily a $7 million defenseman. So, but the cap is going to go up to 1.5. I think they said it's supposed to go up 1.5 mil to 82 something, which will help a bit. But that's something that you have to deal with down the road. And I think that locking him in for this long, it gives you that stability on the back end.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at the number necessarily. Like 9.2 might be a little higher than I figured he would get, 9.25. But the two things that concern me the most about this, and I'm not really all that concerned because I have a lot of confidence that Darnell Nurse is going to actually outplay this contract. I think the way that he's progressing as a defenseman, and people rag on his underlying numbers, and they say that when he's not playing with Connor McDavid, he's not worth it. And you've mentioned the power play. And I think that is one of the concerns, not that he isn't playing it, but that he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt because he doesn't get the gravy numbers that defensemen get when they're on the power play, right? Like, yes, if you want to hide the value of a $9.25 million contract, just get some power play minutes, right?
Exactly.
And you get some gravy points and everybody kind of quiets down a little bit. Nurse is going to have to fight through that because you're right. He's only going to get second at the best unit power play time. He's not going to get those gravy points. He's going to have to get it at 5-on-5. He might have to get it some in penalty kill. Like, that's where he's going to have to fight through. And he set himself up taking this contract to act like he has to play better than a $9.25 million defenseman. And that could be challenging. I think over time, maybe he does this like Leon Draisaitl did with his 8.5. But the way that Nurse approaches the game, the way he's progressing year after year, I'm not actually worried that he's not going to live up to this money. I just think that immediately behind the 8 ball, people forget that he's got another year at 5.6. That this contract doesn't really kick in. And if you want to look at it like a 9-year deal, it's like 8.8 million on the cap hit, right? If you count this year plus the 8 he just signed for. So it's not as bad, but it's still one of those things where he's going to have to play out of his mind and he's going to have to live up to the expectations. But if there's a guy that could do it, it's probably Darnell Nurse. So that doesn't worry me so much, but I do feel bad. Like we talked about it, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but Tyson Barrie, his contract, right? Such a deal that if he doesn't do all the defensive things, everybody's going to be like, well, he's not making that much. Darnell Nurse is making every penny. Like there's not anything more you could have given him. So he's got to play up to that level and beyond. I think he'll do it, but I'm a little concerned that he's put a lot of pressure on himself. Hopefully he can handle it.
Yeah, the pressure's there for sure. I think, he can live up to it for sure. And the thing is down the road, you might look at this and say it's a bargain. Adam Fox is on the rise, and as the cap goes up, he might be a $10 million defenseman by the time he's ready for the next contract in the year, right? Or even Seth Jones doesn't perform to his number, and then Nurse does, and he looks like a bargain, right?
Yeah.
So it's all relative to the market as well. So of course the pressure's on him now to live up to it. But I think that for the stability he provides and everything else, especially come playoff time, it'll be worth it in the end.
Brian, how much of this contract do you think should be valued on what he brings outside of just his on ice production, the minutes he plays, things like that? Like, there's a guy who works harder than maybe anybody. He's the leader. He's taking Evan Bouchard under his wing. Evan Bouchard is skating with him this offseason. He's a workout fiend. Like, this is the guy. He's part of this leadership core. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but how much of the value did the Oilers place on the fact that Darnell Nurse is Darnell Nurse? He's just absolutely the guy you want going to war with you. And he's not a guy you want to let go.
I would hope, and I imagine they value that, and I'm sure that factored into it. That's the missing piece here that's critical. I mean, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit, so I'll save some of my thoughts for that, but it's keeping this core together. It's the same thing with Nugent Hopkins. It's these guys, it says so much about these guys that they want to be here. They want to win in Edmonton. And I mean, we were talking about, I think it was last week with the, was it Warren Fogle when they traded for him, and all the guys are on the ice together, right? Yeah. I mean, Devin Shore is there, Nurse is there, McDavid is there. I mean, this is what I love about this team. This is the championship culture, and you keep the people that are part of that culture in place. You put value on that, and they're doing that, and that's how successful organizations are built, whether that's a hockey team or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I'm glad they're valuing this kind of thing.
Julian, are you at all surprised by his comments in the media bill that he was like, I'm looking very closely at the NHL marketplace. I'm checking the financials and the economics of the league. And I knew that if I was, because originally he was looking at a 4-year deal. And then when all these other defensemen got what they got, the Dougie Hamiltons and Seth Jones, and that market was set, he's like, okay, well, fine, I'll look at an 8-year deal because I'm going to get $9 million or more. And then he turned that. Were you at all surprised that he didn't look and consider, because I don't think he considered it one bit, a team-friendly deal? Like, if he had signed at 8.75 or 8.8, it might not have helped a lot, but it would have helped a little. Like, were you a little surprised at all that he didn't take the team-friendly kind of end of things, considering how much everybody says that he loves Edmonton?
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising. I think that's part of also the reason why fans might be a little bit upset about it, just because they might have thought he would come in at a little bit of a cheaper number, especially with the term they gave him. I mean, it's about staying where you want to stay, and Holland goes and gets his guy at the end of the day. So I think that's the most important thing, was to just make sure that he's locked up for as long as he wanted. And players have to look out for themselves too. So I don't necessarily blame him for not taking less, and he's already done that bridge deal, I think. So I mean, you could almost argue, that he did the two of them, right? So
yeah, you
could almost argue that he already kind of paid his dues, and we've seen that as a trend throughout the league. Is like even Hyman, he did it last year with the Leafs he had like a $2 million deal, and this was his time to cash in. And everybody knows that their time has to come at some point, where they have to worry about themselves and put them before the team, and it's understandable, and that's just the way life goes.
Brian, do you think? And I've heard this, and I don't know that I buy it. I have a 2-part question. One, do you think there's an Edmonton tax? Everybody says, just signing with the Oilers, there's like a little bit of an Edmonton tax. Sometimes people value that at about $500,000. That's one. And then 2, do you think, and I've heard this too, I don't think I buy it, that Draisaitl might be a little pissy about this because he got 8.5 and Darnell Nurse got 9.25. Like, do you think that even matters?
It's a great question. I do think there's an Edmonton tax per se. I mean, I think in the sense that you have to overpay to make people want to come to this market a little bit, or make them want to stay in this market, because this market is what it is. I mean, we can get, that's a whole other show we can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, do I think there's something like that in play? Yeah, I think there probably is. And there probably is a lot of markets where you have to maybe overpay a little bit to get people to come to that particular market. The Draisaitl thing, who knows? I mean, these guys are supposedly great friends. There doesn't seem to have ever been any issue between any of these guys during the course of these contracts being signed one after another. So, I mean, I have no idea. I would hope not, because just alluding to what we were talking about a minute ago, that would certainly throw a wrench in that whole culture thing a little bit. But I think they understand how this goes, right? I mean, this is the game they play. Someone could sign, who knows? Jesse Puljujarvi could have a monster year, and he's getting a ridiculous contract in his next time his deal is up. And now is somebody getting, is Zach Hyman looking and getting upset with him? I don't know. So
prime example is the Avalanche, right? Like look at McKinnon, right? Like I think just when people are like players are more reserved, like Draisaitl's a little bit more reserved to himself, a little bit more quiet, leads on by example, right? So people kind of might mistake that as for unhappy or unsettled about something. He's not as vocal as everybody else is. So I think that's kind of might play into it, but I don't think everybody's time comes. Like when Draisaitl's contract's up, he's probably going to get paid again, right? Like, so he's going to cash in again too. So you can't look at the numbers, what they were before. Everything's changing so fast in the league in terms of the salary cap and even how players are developing that people sometimes outplay their contracts and some are stuck, having to live up to them. Right. So that's just the way it goes.
And if you look at the bar, how it's being set too, would it almost be fair to say at this point that comparing forward deals to defense deals is an apple to orange kind of thing?
Yeah, well, not only that, but like Nurse's comments about the economics of the NHL. I mean, you've got Draisaitl's deal had some restricted free agency years in there, and it was done at a time that these defenseman contracts hadn't ballooned like they did this. Mm-hmm. Like, I think these guys are smart enough. They watch it closely enough. Yeah. They watch the cap. They watch the league, and they know that, this just happened. The only reason I'm asking is because, one, people have said it, and two, I heard Robin Leonard's comments today from Vegas about how underpaid he is, and he started comparing himself to like the Bobrovskys and the Jacob Markstroms of the world, and he seemed kind of choked about it. And I was like, well, maybe this is Robin Leonard. I don't know, but these guys, he's an interesting guy, right? Like he's a super interesting dude. So it could just be that, but I heard people say, and I didn't bring it up to say that I think that's happening. I don't buy that for a second. I think everybody's cool with it. Like I think McDavid and Draisaitl are probably the happiest dudes in that room that Darnell Nurse got paid. You know what I mean? Like I think he's probably earned it. So that doesn't shock me at all. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'll start with you, Julian, talking about people that are going to get, coming to Edmonton. We talked about Nurse staying and maybe the Edmonton tax, blah, blah, blah. Brendan Perlini signed a two-way deal with the Oilers. It's a really small deal. To me, this looks like it's probably more a depth deal for Bakersfield. I don't know that he's going to get he'll get a legit shot, but I don't know that he's necessarily going to play a ton of time in Edmonton. But he signs a one-year deal. What'd you think of the signing? It kind of came out of nowhere, right? Like he left the NHL. He had some time with Arizona and Chicago, but then he just took off and now he's back. There's a history a little bit with Tippett and then maybe a little bit in Detroit. What'd you think of that signing?
I don't mind it. I think it's a more of like what the Dominik Kubalin signing was a little while ago, last year, right? Like, it's just a depth signing. I think there's a little bit of upside there. He hasn't really hit his stride. He's been on a couple bad teams I think he's with Chicago, Arizona. He's might have had some tough stretches there. And I just think it's a low risk signing. It's obviously going to be for depth. I think he brings a lot of speed and he could bring some skill and a little bit of scoring upside in your bottom six. So low risk, maybe a little bit of a reward there. And he's an RFA. I think he has ARB rights after the season too. So if he does okay, at least they can keep him around for a little longer too.
He's a former first round pick, right? He's number 12 overall from 2014. He did have a decent time in Arizona. He did a 14 and a 17 goal season. So he's hit double digits twice. But I think the deal was Detroit wanted to give him a two-way contract at the time. He didn't want it, so he took off, right? And now he's back sort of accepting what he can to get back in the league. So, Brian, what's your take on this? You got any opinion on Perlini as a depth sign? I don't know that I hear what you're saying, Julian, about Dominik Kubalin, but I think Dominik Kubalin was brought in specifically to play top six and play with Leon Draisaitl. I don't see that necessarily.
No, but I think they're the same type of player. They could be used in I think their upside is similar. I'll say it that way because I don't think he wasn't brought in specifically to play what Kubalin's playing, but I think that the way Kahuna was last year and what Perlini's upside is, I think they're similar that way.
What about you, Brian? What do you think?
Yeah, I wrote about this on the weekend when they signed him. I love this deal because I think it's a no-lose situation. It's a two-way contract. If he does prove himself and they actually find a role for him and he sticks with the big club, it's only $750K. So it's almost a negligible cap hit. And this, he's only 25. He's a guy that he had a rough year in 2019-20, only had one goal in 40 games. But up until that point, his first 3 years in the league, he was basically scoring at a clip of like 20 goals per 82 games. So I like it. I like the fact, I like the narrative too. Like you mentioned, he kind of balked at the idea of taking the two-way contract with Detroit a year ago, or a year and a half ago, I guess it would be. And now has decided to come, has gone over, has kind of paid his dues a little bit, maybe grew up a little bit, and he's come back. And now he's willing to take a two-way deal. It does not pay him a lot to prove himself, to get back in. So that to me kind of suggests a little bit of maturity too. I think the Oilers are going to get a hungry guy who's eager to prove himself. And like I say, at age 25, I mean, if he has found his game, if he's gotten himself into a place mentally where he's more prepared to contribute and adopt to a role on a team, he could still have a really decent career here. So, and if it doesn't work out, bury the contract in the minors. No,
Yeah,
no harm, no foul.
250,000, right? Like,
Yeah.
costs nothing to put him there. I am kind of curious to see what happens with him, because he seems like the kind of guy that it's hard to know, right? You take off the NHL, you play international hockey. He was 7th on his team in scoring, and he missed half the season. But that's a totally different league. So I don't know what happens when you leave and then you come back. Typically, it hasn't gone terribly well for players who've done that, or the Oilers bring in guys like Gaetan Haas or Joakim Jagr. Just doesn't always fit, right? So I don't know, but Perlini's been in the NHL before, and he's had double-digit goals twice. So maybe if he's a guy that gets really hot, he could start to produce a little bit, and maybe it's a super win. But like you said, no lose situation for sure. I don't know what else they're going to do here, but if you're going to have competition for jobs, you might as well do it, in the depth positions and give people a reason to fight for employment. Brian, I'm going to start with you because I know how much of a Stuart Skinner fan you are. What's your take on the Skinner signing? I mean, you're the biggest advocate for giving this guy some chances here in the NHL. I don't know if you mean this season or next, but you're firmly a believer that he could probably do some damage on the good side for the Oilers. What do you think of the deal?
No, I think it's a steal of a deal. A dude should be making $5.5 million a year at least. So yeah, no,
Brian wants him to be the starting goaltender this season.
That's right. That's right. I'm glad that he's in for 2 more years. This was mere formality. I think we knew that they'd arrived at the 2-way contract, and I think I've said my piece many times on here about.
Just go back and watch the old show so you can hear everything that Brian's ever said about Stuart Skinner.
I could rehash that, but no, I mean, it's if he contributes, if he gets the opportunity and he contributes at the level that I think he's capable of, this could be another fantastic contract.
Julian, do you think he's going to get the opportunity? Like, are we looking at a situation where we could probably predict that Koskinen and Smith will struggle, or because Koskinen and Smith could be a decent pairing and he's still got Alex Stalock on this thing, does Stuart Skinner see any time?
I think ideally you would want him 1 more year, at least in the minors, to see if he can do what he did this year again, just because the season was kind of unorthodox, a little bit split up and stuff. So I'd like to see him do it again for a full length season in the minors. But I think that there's a good quality chance that he ends up in the NHL this season. I think that the way that Mike Smith and Koskinen have had injury problems or had to, share the net. I think it's only at their age that it's quite possible that they find themselves down a goaltender at some point, especially 82 games again this season instead of the 56. So I think that's a very likely possibility. And I don't know what's going on with Stalock, so I don't think you can really count him in as pencil him in as an option really. So just in terms of injuries, I think there's a likelihood that you could see him a little bit. And if he can continue to develop, I think I like the signing. I like the player. And goalies are weird. They pop out of nowhere. They have good seasons, then they are down season. And then next thing you know, they're Mike Smith and they come back at 39 years old. And so it's hard to read, but overall, I think that he could play up to maybe 20 games in this season if people go down with injury.
Well, the one argument I will make for him is that the Oilers kind of need to know what he is, and maybe sooner than later, right? Because Mike Smith's the only guy that is in the net for the Oilers that is signed past the season. Like Stalock may or may not play. I got a feeling he's probably going to play a little bit, but Koskinen's probably gone. And so you need somebody that, if Holland needs to go out and sign someone or needs to get a starting 1A with Mike Smith as the 1B for not this season, but next, you kind of have to have an idea where Skinner is, don't you? Like, Brian, do you think that if he doesn't play, there's some real questions as to what the future, and like the Oilers got some decent prospects, Konovalov, Stuart Skinner. They've got some guys that could eventually be, I don't know if they could be starters, but they could be decent goaltending options for the Oilers. Do you need to find out what Skinner can do this year?
Yeah, and I've been saying it like they've been trying to find their goalie of the future forever now, and there's been talk. Well, they got to trade for somebody. They got to sign somebody in free agency. They may have this guy right under their nose. They may not. He may not. He may not turn out to anything, or he may be everything that I believe he can be. And this can be the guy that is their starting goalie as they contend for Stanley Cups over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And I think the time is now to trade to give him an opportunity, because you do have to see what you got. This is the perfect time, right? You now, if you look with Koskinen, one way or another, he's going to be off the books by the end of this season. Whether they get rid of him one way or his contract expires, this is it. So I mean, you're looking. Mike Smith is not going to be the starter at this time next year. I just can't see a 40-year-old goalie being the guy. So it could work perfectly where you audition him this year, give him 20, 25, 30 games. If he proves himself, let him roll with it. I don't think it's fair to say that this is going too fast. I think he's at least 2+ years now. He's proven himself in the AHL. And I think if you look, I mean, Julian pointed out, I mean, goalies come, they have up seasons, down seasons. We've seen goalies much younger than him with much less AHL experience than him come in and have tremendous NHL seasons playing like a full complement of schedule, and then go on in a run and lead their team in the playoffs.
Spencer Knight did it. He jumped right in there, right?
Exactly. So I don't think this is too soon for him. And I'm looking like everyone's like, well, who's this team's goalie of the future? He might be right there, and you got to find out if it's him.
Yeah, we just don't know, right? Like that's the deal.
I think he could be like if he comes up and he can show you what Nedeljkovic showed you, or even a little less than that, then for sure they can't make the mistake and pull what Carolina did and send him off to Detroit or something, like that's got to be your tandem to pair with somebody else. And that gives them an opportunity to maybe not spend as much as they would have to on a goalie next season when Koskinen is off the books, if they don't need a 1A, rather do more like what the Leafs did and get a guy to as a tandem, or what everybody else in the NHL is doing these days.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, you brought it up, so it's a good transition for our final segment of the week here. Talking about that window, right? Like Stuart Skinner, you've got a 4 or 5 year window to see what he is, and we see one of the guys that's going to be with this core to compete moving forward. One of the things that seems very, very clear, and I wrote an article about it this week on the Hockey Writers, is that the Oilers have put Holland, I guess, has put all his chips in. He's totally sold on the idea that he's got 5 guys: Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Darnell Nurse, Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. That's his 5. That's his core 5. He's moving forward with this group, and he firmly believes, at least that seems to be the way that he's thinking, that this is the group that's going to get the Oilers where they haven't been since the glory days of the team, or 2006 when they made a run to the finals. So what is your take? Julian, I'll start with you. What's your take on the idea here that this core 5 is the core 5 to rely on, to think, yeah, there's potential here, this group can do it? And I'm asking you first because you're a big Toronto Maple Leafs guy, and you've seen how that may or may not work, because the Toronto Maple Leafs put all their money and all their chips in 4 forwards, and it hasn't paid off so far. So what's your take on the idea that Edmonton's full on 5 guys, and they're going to build this team around those 5, and maybe this 5 can get them to a Stanley Cup?
Well, I think that it's just the way the NHL is now. You see, like you have to start somewhere. So you have to get the players you want, and then you have to have a core. So whether that is you're overpaying 4 guys, or overpaying with air quotations, but like it's very relative to everybody else in the league, because you look at Tampa Bay, they have Hedman, and then they have Point, Stamkos, Kucherov, and then insert Alex Killorn or Andre Palat, whoever you want. But everybody has that core, and I think it comes down more about building it around the values and the work ethic and maybe some of the intangibles more or less than and then lining up with the timeline of your team. So this is the prime of McDavid and Draisaitl and even Nurse and stuff like that. So to have everybody lined up the way they do, it's a little bit different than Toronto, because their deals are expiring at different times, just the way it works out. So I think that overall there is similarities, but like for Toronto, Riley's not locked in, so they don't really have that workhorse moving forward. And they actually have, I actually calculated, it's about Toronto's core five there is a $45 million cap hit, and Edmonton's is actually 40. So, that's an extra player, and that's a lot of cap space to play with in a cap world, right? So I think that alone kind of speaks to them building their team, accordingly to the players who want to be there, and then lining them up all with the timelines to push all their chips in the table, like you said, and have them go for a good run.
Well, the timeline's certainly good, right? Like the ages of McDavid and Draisaitl and this core that they've got together, they're going to have a 4-year window where they're all together on contracts, where Draisaitl's the first to go if anybody does go. So they've got that time. I think the big concern that a lot of people are raising here, and Brian, I'll ask you, is that they've invested a lot of money in these 4 or 5. Julian points out it's not even as much as Toronto, which is interesting, but that's half the cap hit essentially on 5 people. Can the Oilers build around those 5? I have my take, and I'll go after you, but do you think that that's at all concerning, that much money is invested in 5 people?
It can be concerning. I think any team, if you just take any random team, look at who their core 5 players would be that you think could get you to that next level, it's probably going to come in around that amount of money. Or it could be more, as Julian said, with the Leafs. So I think we've been talking about what the bar is, what the market is for these guys now. This is what you have to pay to have an assembly, a collection of talent like that is the heart of your team. What makes the difference is what you do, how wisely you spend the money to put the players around them. So that's where I think this is going to be won or lost, literally speaking, for the Oilers. And, if you get Tyson Barrie deals where we look at that and it's like, wow, the leading defensive point scorer in the league is only making $3.5 million. Well, great deal. We look at, or if we look at somebody like Mike Smith and say that here it could be a 40-plus-year-old goalie who's might play 1 or 2 games next year and he's getting $2.2 million. That's a bad deal, right? So it's what you do with everything around it. And that's, I think, what will define this. And it's probably going to be little 2 or 3 year deals here and there to complement these guys as it evolves each season. We see it with Barrie. He's getting the 3 years, and it just goes from there.
I think the biggest concern for some people, because in the Edmonton market and similar markets, whether it's Toronto or Montreal or Calgary or Vancouver or whatever, is people crap all over like the Duncan Keith deals. It's just going to happen. That's just the way that it goes. Duncan Keith could be fantastic. He could come in and he could, be a leader, a teacher. He could play better than everybody's thinking he could play. People are still going to crap all over that deal. It's just the way that it is, right? But what I find very interesting is what's going to happen with Jesse Puljujarvi and Kailer Yamamoto. And a lot of people are concerned that these guys are going to hit home runs and that all of a sudden they're not affordable anymore. I'm here to tell you guys that's not happening. So fans that are worried that Jesse Puljujarvi is all of a sudden going to be a $5 million player and Kailer Yamamoto is going to 2.5 on this year's deal, it's not happening. Like, the Oilers own the hammer on these deals. Their arbitration rights, restricted free agents, like, they don't have the leverage to go out and say, hey, I'm Jesse Puljujarvi, I'm going to have a good year this year, give me $4 million this year. It's not happening. Like, so these contracts are not going to come in at an exorbitant amount of money that the Oilers can't afford to build around. And when they do, if they want to invest $6 million in a goaltender, Mikko Koskinen comes off the books and maybe Kyle Turris comes off the books next year, you can afford to do it. You can get a $6 million goaltender and it doesn't greatly affect your cap. And as Julian pointed out earlier, the expectation is it's going to go up $1 million, maybe $1.5 million. So you have a little more wiggle room to do it. And I like the combination of the fact that the core 5 that they've put in this team, one is a defenseman, and the other 4 are very versatile players. The only one that doesn't play the penalty kill is Connor McDavid. But Connor McDavid's so fantastic, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, like Draisaitl plays the penalty kill, Nugent plays the penalty kill, Zach Hyman does. They also all play power play, except for Nurse, but he could, right? The only reason he doesn't is because Tyson Barrie's there, right?
Exactly.
So I do like the combination of the core a lot better. Like, I don't watch the Leafs like Julian does, but and you could tell me, Julian, if these guys play penalty kill minutes and stuff like that, but I don't. Does Austin Matthews play the penalty kill?
No, he doesn't. It's just
like, these guys are kind of not one-dimensional, but they're elite offensive players.
Yeah,
and that's what they're being.
Similar play styles, not like what the Oilers have built with a bunch of different. Like, Hyman can be a little bit more, mucker, forechecker. But I think what the major point is that these RFA deals where you have restricted free agents is where you need to have the value and have them outplay those contracts. And that's where you're going to get what Brian was saying, is having that surrounding those surrounding players to put in place. That's what's going to make your team. We've seen it with Tampa Bay. They've always had guys ready to step up and fill in those roles. That's how you're going to get maximize your cap space and maximize the amount of quality players you have, is bringing those young guys. So if McLeod's, matures this year, maybe he's not ready to take all the minutes, but if he can mature enough that in a year he's ready to just step in for the next guy who's going to be gone, that's exactly what you're going to need for moving forward with the amount of years they have in their window.
Yeah, and all this tosses in there too. Like if you said to any team in the league, here's a 40 million AAV, and these are the 5 players you've got, and you've got them each for this X number of years, who's going to turn that down? I mean, this is a core, and anyone would take that for what they're paying these guys. Now, maybe someone's making a little bit more than they should. Someone's making a little less than they should. Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah.
But right. But you know what I mean? Like, this is 40 million for this 5. Any GM would take that and then try and build around that.
And Chicago's done it. Chicago's kind of done it in the past already, where the cap was a little bit lower, but these guys were still getting paid, close to the same percentage of the cap space that's being eaten up. Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen it work. And even they're in that situation now. Kane's back, Taves is back. Kane's there still. They just paid Seth Jones, so they're a team that's right against the cap, and they are similar with the core 5. It's very similar that everybody's going to build their team in a similar way, and they have to invest that money and that term into the players they think that are going to get them there, and surround them with the best players they can with the available cap space.
Yeah, well, we've seen it work and we've seen it not work, right? Like, we've seen it work in Pittsburgh and Chicago. We've not seen it work in Toronto so far. San Jose wasn't able to do it, and they had a core of guys like Marleau and Thornton and stuff like that they did, Pavelski, and it didn't work, right? They got close, but they never were able to do it. So I was curious to see what you guys thought about this group of 5 and whether or not you thought this group of 5 has the ability to lead them. So I'll ask that question directly, and I'll let you guys take 15 seconds, 30 seconds to answer. Brian, do you think this core 5 can lead the Oilers to a cup in the next 4 years?
In the next 4 years.
Well, that's the window, right? Because Draisaitl's contract ends. So that's the window we're talking about here.
Yes, period.
Julian?
I think that next season is where they're going to make the most noise, but I think this is the right group to invest their time and money in. Yeah,
I like the combination too. I know everybody outside the Edmonton market is poo-pooing all over this thing, but I do like the combination.
Inside it too.
Yeah, well, that's I guess that's true. That's the way that the Oilers, they're so emotionally invested in this team. And it's hard to hate it because they're passionate, and that's good. But just to find the negatives in so much of this stuff, it's a little trying at times to kind of be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm part of this fan base. But at the same time, you're really, really glad that they at least care about this team, right? So it'll be very interesting. But I'm starting to, I don't know that I was ever down on any of the plans or the things that they did. I'm still sold that they could have done a little better on the cap hit on Duncan Keith. But I like Duncan Keith. I like the idea of him being here. I like the player. I like what he can bring for the next 2 years. I don't love they're paying the full $5.5 million, but you can find that on every team with every GM, and people going crazy and dramatic and saying, oh, Ken Holland's a terrible GM. I mean, come on. Like, it's really not realistic. Before we let it go, I'll give you guys kind of one more thought here. Is there anything else that you see the Oilers doing? For me, I think they're going to add another depth defenseman, probably whether it's Slater Cuckoo or somebody else like a Jordy Ben. Brian, do you think there's anything else the Oilers do here in the next week or two to give us a reason to have a show next week?
Oh, they will, because that's how this goes, right? I mean, whatever it is, we're not going to see it coming. So I don't know what it is going to be, but it's going to be something.
Yeah, I think they want us to go on air. I think that's the deal. I think Ken Holland secretly watches the show and he's like, you cannot go away for a week. I got him something. Sign somebody. We need Julian back on the show.
Yeah.
What do you
I don't know. I just think that everything's kind of, all the dust is kind of settled now. So I think everybody wants to see going into training camp what they have, let these prospects kind of come up and see what they can do. And if they need to address anything at that point, I think they will. So I think it might kind of quiet down here, see where everything kind of shakes down and hold off. But unless a trade comes in for a goalie or we hear something like that, I don't think there's much to be had until later in the offseason.
I just want to jump in. Jim, you mentioned Slater Cuckoo. You think we see him back?
Yeah. Do you want me to give you more? No. I do. I do. I think I don't know that he proved everything that he could have proved with the injuries and the way that he didn't get all the ice time he could have gotten. But there was something about the way that he was deployed by Dave Tippett. I think Tippett likes him. Like, I just get the sense that he's got confidence in him, that he used him maybe in situations where we might have been like, oh, man, I can't believe they're using Cuckoo here. Like when he was injured and he came back, he got slotted in like almost immediately, right? Like, I think there's something, and he did really well when he was with Chicago against the Oilers. I mean, like they like this player. I think they have a whatever, and he's going to come in super cheap, like 750.
That's a welcome back signing for sure, and you can switch it with Russell.
The reason I asked is because I agree with your points too, and I'm kind of surprised he's not re-signed yet.
I just don't know that anybody else is interested, right? Like, I like that he can go left side, right side. He can play wherever. And I don't think he's like, even Perlini, everybody's like, oh man, like, I can't believe he came to, like, he's not getting a million offers, right? I don't think Slater Cuckoo's getting a million offers. So I think the Oilers have time to go and look around and go, okay, well, what are we looking at here? And Cuckoo's kind of in their back pocket. And if he isn't and he goes somewhere else, if Buffalo or somebody else just scoops him up, the Oilers have other options. It's not like they're like, oh my gosh, we lost Slater Cuckoo. Yeah. So I do think he's back though. Like, I have a feeling if he's healthy for most of the season, he's actually a fairly productive defenseman. He didn't prove it, but I think he's going to be interesting to watch. So, all right, guys, well, we'll leave it at that. That was a good show, interesting show. The Darnell stuff was super interesting to talk about. For everybody else, join us maybe next week. We'll see.
If you want to see us again, make sure you comment.
Yeah, and we'll answer the comments. If there's anything you want us to talk about, we'll make sure that we do that, and we'll set it up for next week. But for everybody else, hit the like button, subscribe button on YouTube, on Facebook, hit notifications buttons, get all the videos, and check out the other videos on YouTube as well. There's some really, really good shows with the Hockey Raiders crew, and they're doing their best to give you the best content possible all the time. So for everybody else, my name is Jim Parsons. For Brian Swane, Julian Mongillo, maybe Colton will be back with us next week. It's been another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. We will talk to you right away.